right. All right. I am going to stop sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure the next one is not about to come on. Let me exit out of this, and then we will get started for today. I'm going to share my screen again and make sure I have the right screen up. Listen, technology, you got to make sure it's working right. All right. All righty. Let me go here. Okay. All right. We are back. We are back. We are back. This week, we are still talking about spiritual practices, thirsting for more, employing spiritual practices for deeper communion with God. And I'm excited once again to share with you this week. And so let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to try to define contemplation. We're also going to try to articulate the aim of contemplation as a spiritual practice. And we're going to do our best to name 3 ways that we can employ contemplation in our spiritual journey. So what you heard as you were entering the space was Mahalia Jackson singing, "I Come to the Garden Alone." And it is an old hymn of the church. To be quite honest, the last time I think I've heard Mahalia Jackson or heard this song was about 20 years ago as a child in my grandmother's church, a Baptist church. And every now and then, I think it's important that we kind of reach back to grab some old hymns, reach back and grab some songs that are simple yet profound, that the words are not complicated. They are direct and they speak to the heart of the song. They speak to the heart of the matter. And so even as we think about entering this space and we're thinking about spiritual practices, at the end of the day, right, we're coming to the garden alone in some sense, early at times. Some of us are practicing early in the morning when the house is quiet, when no one's calling our name. There are no text messages that are lighting up our phones. And so we're coming to the space early, listening for the voice of God. And I love the song, especially the part where it says he walks with me and talks with me, right? That it's not that God is walking in front of me and I'm trying to keep up, nor is God walking behind me and I'm trying to watch my pace, but God is walking right beside me, meaning that God is keeping pace with me. But it also says he talks with me, not at me, not over me, not under me, but with me, meaning we are in a dialogue. And what a joy it is, right, to be in dialogue with our God, to not only share our own experiences and our own challenges, but to hear God say to us, "Dear child, my beloved, you are not alone. My beloved, you are mine and I am yours." And so as we are entering the space and thinking about spiritual practices, at the end of the day, wherever we might find our garden, we go there seeking God's presence and God's peace and God's clarity in our lives. And so hopefully that helps you to kind of think about the space and what we're planning to do together today. I do want to recap what we talked about last week, because I thought we had a wonderful conversation last week about spiritual practices. We got grounded in spiritual practices. What are they about? What are they for? And I invited you to think about practices in terms of exploration, that you don't have to get it right. And no, it's not a matter of creating spiritual robots, right? But finding the practices that best fit our season of life at the time, and doing our very best to be faithful to the practice as long as we can, and then listening to the voice of God as God shifts us from one practice and possibly to another one. We talked about Sabbath. That was an interesting conversation. We talked about Sabbath as a spiritual practice, and we mentioned several things that we can do in order to enter into Sabbath, right? Stopping, resting, delighting, and contemplating as well. We also mentioned that before we can actually do this Sabbath, there are some things we got to prepare. We got to do some things in advance. And I wanted to just kind of bring to your attention, I want to kind of think about this mindset in helping us to get our minds wrapped around Sabbath. We didn't go into a lot of detail about that last week, but I wanted to make sure you had this information this week, because I think it is important to us trying to commit to a Sabbath rest. One of the things that is important is that we do have to acknowledge in our own selves where we may reinforce busyness in our own lives. I think it's important for us to just come to grips with that, to come to grips with what types of behaviors, what are we doing that would suggest that we need to keep busy? What thoughts are we having that would suggest we need to keep going, right? I think the other thing that is important for us to consider is what might we be running from? What are we trying to avoid by being busy, right? Because in some sense, busyness is a distraction from something else. While we may not want to admit it, it may be a distraction from dissatisfaction at work. It could be a distraction from dissatisfaction in a personal relationship. It could be a distraction from certain insecurities and certain fears that we have. And so we have to think about, what are the things that are distracting us, recognize our patterns, and then we have to give ourselves permission to rest. Give ourselves permission to really stop running, that it's okay to stop running, and that it's okay to rest. So you had homework. Last week I said, try to carve out 1 to 2 hours of Sabbath time where you actually stop, you rest, you delight, and you contemplate. So listen, I just want to know, did you do your homework? That's all I want to know is, did you do your homework? How was it? Was it hard to carve out this time? What did you learn about yourself? And so I want to see your faces as you are sharing with me the fact that you did your homework and it was great. Listen to me, I'm claiming that it was great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I really want to see you. Did anybody do their homework last week besides me? And if you did, how was it? I'll give you some time to share. Please don't be afraid. And maybe you're saying, I wasn't on last week, but I still took a Sabbath rest. If that's the case, I want you to share how you did that. How were you able to carve out this time to rest just for a moment? Nobody did their homework. Miss Cindy is laughing at me. Well, look, it's okay. It's okay. Breathe it through. It's all right. It's hard to do homework, especially when we have families and things like that. But that's okay. We are managing, and it will be all right. So let me go back here and share my screen again. Let's still talk about it because I still think that it's important that we kind of discuss how it is that we, can take this Sabbath rest. I did my very best to carve out at least an hour. I'll be honest with you, it was a difficult task. I think if I don't think about it ahead of time, kind of like meal prep, right? If you are trying to eat healthy and maybe diet, I don't even like that word diet, but if you're trying to make healthier choices, it is not easy to make healthier choices without planning up front. That is a hard task, especially if you are at the grocery store and you're hungry. That's one thing you cannot do, right? Is go to the grocery store hungry because you will pick up things that you know you don't need. But when we're carving out this Sabbath space and carving out time to rest, we have to prepare. We have to be able to tell the house, look, from 7 to 8 is Sabbath time for me. Try not to call me. Don't knock on my door, right? And so as for myself, I need to make sure that I'm thinking and I'm preparing for my Sabbath time. And so I have to make sure that my husband and my child don't have plans for me so that I can take that rest. I think the other thing is that as parents, oftentimes we are always busy. There's not enough. There's a dish to be washed, some clothes to be folded, some food to prepare, a child to get ready for bed. And so we can find ourselves doing that on autopilot, to be quite honest with you, on autopilot without even consciously thinking, do I have to do this in this moment, right? And so as we're thinking about Sabbath rest, we have to also consider in what ways that we are operating on autopilot. And God is calling us to pause, and we're not paying attention to that pause. So I'm actually preaching to myself now. And so I would just encourage you to, if you are struggling with taking out Sabbath time, to do your very best, to keep working at it, right? It's practice. We practice, and practice makes better. And so we just keep working at it as best we can. Why don't we move forward to the practice that I thought that we would discuss today, which is contemplation. Contemplation as a spiritual practice, right? And so as we are moving into this space, we're going to ask the question, the simple question, what is contemplation, right? What does that mean? Is it just simply just sitting and thinking arbitrarily about anything? What is it? Is it intentional? Is it very vague, and anything that comes to mind we think about? And so here are some definitions that I've been able to just kind of pull from some scholars. It says, contemplation is any way we can unveil the illusions that masquerade as reality in our lives, that we're able to reveal the reality that is behind the mask. Now, this is from Parker Palmer. I'm reading his book, The Active Life, which is a really interesting work. And I'll share with you some of the resources I used at the end. But in it, Parker Palmer suggests that we live in illusions, and that contemplation helps us to get to reality, to help us to see the truth. And what do we mean by illusions? This illusion that having more is better, right? This illusion that doing is better than being. This illusion that more education equals more opportunities. These illusions that we have that actually kind of guide our lives in a way. And he's saying that contemplation helps us to see the illusion for what it is, and helps us to see the truth, that doing is not better than being. Doing is something, but it is not, we cannot put it above being, right? And so as we're thinking about contemplation, contemplation should help to reveal a truth about us, but also a truth about our neighbor, a truth about our God, that it is a space that we enter where we are really seeking to be authentic, our authentic selves. Another definition says that it is sustained, sympathetic, reverent attention. It occurs when we take the time to dwell. In Mahalia Jackson's song, she says, the joy we share as we tarry. And tarry means that we spend time, we stay there for a while. We stay there long enough to get the thing that we came there for, right? And so this sustained dwelling is what one author says contemplation is. Someone has also said that contemplation is a slowing down so that we might be with God. Now, listen, we all know that we live in a world, and we're socialized to keep going, to pass ourselves by the mirror on our way out the door, to keep going, to barely wash our hands, to barely say hello, because we're always on our way somewhere to do something. But for this scholar, contemplation means to slow down, right? And what we're learning, I think, about spiritual practices is that in almost every practice, there's this element of slowing. I didn't say stopping all the time, but I did say slowing, or at least this intentional awareness, which requires some level of slowing your pace, right? The last one says that contemplation is the ability to see with faith, hope, and love, to recognize that every experience is more than meets the eye. And I like this because we see things with our natural eye, but then there is something else that we might need to see. I'll give you an example. You're at the grocery store, you're, checking the cantaloupes for their ripeness, and you're just going about your day. You're not expecting to meet anybody at the cantaloupe station. You're just picking your fruit so you can move on to the next station at the grocery store. And someone else is standing at the cantaloupes. And you all, maybe you have on a shirt that the person across from you is saying, oh, wow, that's a nice shirt. Where'd you get that? I like those. I like the quote that's on your shirt. And the next thing you know, you're in a conversation about the shirt, and you're in a conversation. And then the next thing you know, you're having a conversation about a testimony, something that has happened in your life, something that you're sharing a resource that they might want to use, and they're sharing something with you. And there's nothing else that happens. There's no transfer of numbers or email addresses. There was just that moment of sharing. And you go on about your business to move on to the apples and oranges, and they go on about their business out the store. And we might see those encounters as, oh, I just saw somebody at the grocery store. But what if those encounters are actually more than that? That maybe you were at the grocery store at the right time, that the other person showed up, so that you might meet at the cantaloupe section to share a conversation. What if you were desperate for conversation and you were glad that someone was speaking to you? Maybe you are in an abusive relationship or in a toxic situation where you don't get conversation with people. And somehow God creates this God encounter where you're able to talk with another, right? And so when we think about contemplation as something more than meets the eye, we have to also think in terms of what is the meaning, what is happening in the moment, what is the God meeting in the moment, and what is God inviting me to see and understand about myself, but even about God, that I might miss if I don't slow down and pay attention, okay? And so why do we contemplate? This is easy. We know this, right? We contemplate because we are bent toward doing more, always doing more, experiencing more, having more. We're just a more group of people, more, right? We contemplate because we don't always stop to ask why. Why am I doing this or that? We typically just live reactive lives. We react to what our supervisors are saying. We react to what our children are asking of us. We react to what our spouses are asking of us. And so in our reacting, it's not necessarily contemplative. It's really like being on autopilot or a robot. Mommy, I want breakfast. You go fix the Cheerios. Honey, can you put gas in the car? You go to the gas station. We're just kind of reactive, right? And so we contemplate because we've been socialized not to ask. And contemplation says, let's ask. I think another thing that is really important to contemplation is that justice work, this work around equity, this work around equality, this work around helping those who are at the margins to flourish in society, requires contemplation before we can get to right action, right? Oftentimes, we like to meet a need without even knowing the need. We like to say, this is what the people need, but we haven't thought about it, nor have we talked to them about it, right? And so contemplation slows us down long enough for us to ask the right questions of ourselves, ask the right questions of the situation so that we can get to the right action that is necessary. And I think lastly, right, contemplation helps us because illusions are controlling, but truth is freeing, right? If we live in this world of illusions, then once we know the truth, it can set us free if we allow it to set us free, right? So I'm going to give you some time to, I want to see your faces once again. I want you to talk back to me. Let me know what you're thinking, how you feeling. Hey, Jack. We're talking contemplation. And so if there are any insights, any burning insights you want to share, I am open to that. You know, I want y'all to talk back to me. I'm listening. I'll give you time. I'm like the school teacher. I got all day.
Well, it seems like I'm the only one who ever talks, but I hate these long periods of silence. And what you're presenting is so interesting that I feel a need to talk back just to say, yeah, I agree with you there. And I've tried. I'm recently retired, and I find out, and I was advised that in my retirement I shouldn't. I should stay active. I should start doing things, and so I'm trying new things now. I'm going to Sunday morning seminary. I'm taking classes at the seminary, and I'm playing softball and trying to stay as active as I can. But I'm having a hard time because I'm busier now than I was when I was practicing law, and and I need to find a balance. And I think this. My wife got me into meditating, and I found it it gives me a certain amount of peace that just being by myself alone and just letting what thoughts come into my mind as they do. And it's sort of interesting the way the thoughts come. And so anyway, I would just say, yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I need to find more time just for being by myself alone. And I'm not alone. God's with me, but it's solitude with God, I would call it. And
we're going to talk about this contemplation and action, right? Because they're not necessarily opposites. You can do both actually at the same time. We're going to talk about that actually next.
Okay.
So let me go ahead. Thank you so much for sharing. If there's anyone else that wants to share, feel free to share. I'm just getting ready to share my screen again so that you can see where we are. Come on. Okay. All right. So let's talk about contemplation and action. So in Parker Palmer's book, The Active Life, he kind of talks a lot about this idea of contemplation and action. And one of the things that I saw in the book is that Parker is very active. Has a very active life. He was involved in a lot of things. And so he didn't want to give those things up in order to be contemplative. He enjoyed being active. He enjoyed serving. He enjoyed ministry. He enjoyed doing the work of ministry, but also his family and things of that sort. And so he talks a little bit about, usually when we think of contemplation, we think in terms of the monastic tradition, right? This getting away, this coming away, this real literal solitude, right? And we think in terms of action as a distraction. This thing that we're doing is a distraction from God, distraction from getting to our center. And so Parker suggests that we are moving away from that idea because most of us are active. We are taking our kids to soccer. We are gardening. We are going to church. We are involved in life in many ways. And so even for him, contemplation was having a fully active life. That's how he essentially defined contemplation. It is being fully involved in life itself, right? And so we want to be sure that when we're thinking of contemplation, it is not antithetical to action, because you can still contemplate and do the things that you enjoy as well. We also know that contemplation oftentimes leads to action, that we're thinking about something and contemplating, and then God is inviting us to do in some sense. And sometimes it is the action that leads to contemplation, right? And so they work together. And so they can be a part of our rhythm of life, that it is not a matter of I have to choose one or the other, but it's how can I contemplate in the space that I find myself in? How can I contemplate as I'm teaching a class? How can I contemplate as I am gardening? How can I contemplate as I'm involved in worship and things of that sort? What we also know about contemplation is that it happens in worship. While we are actively worshiping at the church, we are also contemplating, because something is happening in the service, right? That may speak to us in a way that we're holding on to it, and we're continuing to think about that particular thing that we heard in a song or heard in a prayer or heard in the preached word. And so we know from our own experience, we may not say that it's contemplation, but we're doing it. We're doing it just the same, right? And so as we're kind of thinking about that, I'm reminded of the story of Mary, right? Mary and Martha. Y'all remember that story where Mary was sitting at the feet where Martha was cleaning. She was cleaning in the kitchen, and even in the story, I know that Mary chose the better part. That's what the text says, right? But at the same time, it's not that Martha was doing something bad, right? I think it's a matter of when to contemplate. When is it time to sit down and contemplate? And when can we contemplate while we are active, while we are doing things? If we are engaged in activism and advocating and doing work like that, I believe that we are contemplating at the same time. So when we think about even Dr. King, right, he had I don't want to call it a pledge, but there were spiritual practices that he required of all those who engaged in the nonviolence movement. Anybody that said, I want to be a civil right, be in the movement, there were things they had to do. And one of those things, of course, was pray. Another one was to have an active devotional life. And then another was to contemplate action, right action, versus just reacting, right? And if you have seen videos where there were young Black women and men at the counter, the lunch counter, and they were being taunted and things were thrown on them, and you could see that they were not, you could not see that they were angry. You could see that they were just taking it. Now, I am not saying that in their heads they weren't saying some special words. What I am saying, though, that this life of contemplation helps us to get to a space where the things that are happening to us and around us doesn't affect us in the way that they would normally do. Do it make sense, right? And so even as in one of the books I was reading by Barbara Holmes called Joy Unspeakable, she talks about crisis contemplation. And one of the questions she said is, if you have a auction block in front of you and a whip behind you, can you really contemplate? And her short answer was, yes, you can contemplate. You can think about in what ways can you survive this moment? You can think about in what ways is God calling me to dig into a strength that I cannot even articulate so that I can get past this moment in my life. And so she speaks of African Americans always having an active contemplative life because there were times where our voices were muted. And so there are times where we had no language. So we had to think, we had to contemplate, right? And so as we're thinking about contemplation and the active life, I am suggesting to you that we can still be active and contemplate at the same time. It is just a matter of how we do that. And so let's go into some spiritual practices about how we can use contemplation in our active life. I think this is going to be really good. So we're going to talk about three things: contemplation as self-examination, contemplation and gratitude, and contemplation as forgetting and fasting. So let's talk self-examination. Contemplation as self-examination. And we know this text. You've searched me, Lord, and you know me, right? We know the text where it says, before I was formed in my mother's womb, you knew me, right? You set me apart. And so as we're thinking about things that we can contemplate, ways that we can contemplate, one way is that we can think about the self. I didn't say self-condemnation. I said self-examination. And I have to say that out loud because if there are any perfectionists, overachievers on this phone and on this Zoom call, I know that you already do self-condemnation easily. I know because I'm a perfectionist and I get it, right? We can find the things that are wrong with us with no problem. But the goal here is not to dwell on any shortcomings that we have. It is simply to examine ourselves and ask God to help us to see the spaces in us that need to be reformed, reshaped, sharpened, changed, elevated, right? It is simply that. We do this during communion, if you can think about it, right? Most of the time during the Holy Sacrament, when it's time to take communion, at least in the Baptist church, the pastor says, pray, we're going to pray here, but we want you to pray at your seat because you know what you need. Pray that the Lord might reveal to you the things that need to be changed in you, right? So we do this in some sense, but I'm suggesting that one way we can contemplate is to ask God to show us ourselves. Show me the parts of me that need to desperately need to change. Show me the parts of me that I want to hide, that I don't want people to see, that I'm embarrassed about, right? But also, God, show me the parts of me that hinder my ability to move forward, that hinders my ability to progress, hinder my ability to love fully, to love myself fully, to love my God fully, and to love my neighbor fully. Show that to me, right? One thing I think to note about contemplation and self-examination is that sometimes the answer may not come in the same sitting. So you may contemplate these today, but God may not show you the answer today. It may come tomorrow. And so we have to get comfortable with that. Sometimes contemplation doesn't mean you ask the question and you get an immediate answer, but it does mean that you are in a space to ask and God hears. And when the time is right, God will answer, right? And so one of the things I say here is one of the contemplative questions I ask you, and I'm not asking you to respond to me. This is a personal journey, right? In what ways is God inviting you to search yourself, right? What experience has revealed to you the need to examine yourself? Only you know that. Only you know what it is that the Lord is bidding you to come and see about yourself. We're going to move on to the next one, unless you want to talk about this one. How do we feel about this self-examination? I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see you. How do we feel about that this idea of contemplation is self-examination? We don't like it. We like it. Listen, I do it all the time. I do it all the time, but I don't think I ask God because I am a perfectionist. I'm always trying to figure out how to be better. But I also think that, and this is just coming to me now, I think for those of us who are perfectionists, and what I mean by that, that type A, oftentimes kind of rigid and always want to get it right kind of person. And because you may not subscribe to the labels. But for those of us who are like that, we are oftentimes always engulfed in our flaws. We're always thinking about, oh, I should have said that, or oh, I missed that part, or oh, I stuttered when I said that. And, we're very self-critical. And I'm not very sure that we're thinking in terms of God search me. We're thinking in terms of we're searching ourselves, and we don't give ourselves the grace that God gives us, right? But what would happen if we shifted that and ask the Lord to search us? We invite God's grace into the moments of self-examination that frees us up from being critical in ways that can be condemning, right? It frees us up from that tunnel downward into, sadness and despair and deficiency and things of that sort, because it allows God's grace to emerge, because God's grace is indeed sufficient. Talk back to me. I see you, Jackie. You unmuted yourself.
Yeah. So I was going to wait for a little while to let my peers to participate rather than hearing just my voice. So, but if nobody wants to, I wanted to point out that I'm a member of a 12-step group, and every 12-step group has a step 4, which says that we make a thorough and fearless inventory of ourselves. And then, which is similar to what you've been saying, is contemplating how we need to change. And then step 5 would be admitting these defects of character that we find to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. And then it goes on to asking God to remove these defects of character. And I've often thought that these were pretty good rules for life, not just for people who were members of a 12-step society. But I never really thought about it in terms of contemplation until you said it, but it most certainly is a form of contemplation and prayer, I would say.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because when I was reading research about self-examination, that's one of the things they mentioned was what happens in 12-step programs, that number 4 step is that step of self-examination. And I also think that contemplation, prayer, and meditation go together. They move in the same direction in some sense. And Sabbath opens us up to contemplation, prayer, and meditation, right? And so all of these kind of work together so that we can have a full spiritual life. So remember, we were kind of talking last week about not thinking about practice in terms of I got to get it right, because we're already in some sense doing it. We just may not know that's what we're doing. We don't know what to call it, right? So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. If anyone else has anything to share, you are more than welcome to do that while I am getting back to the slides. Okay, so the next one, let's talk about contemplation is gratitude. The first thing I say is get back to saying grace before each meal. Now, I know everybody on the call probably say their grace, but I am telling you right now, I don't always do that. Don't get mad. I'm just telling the truth about myself, right? That I'm rushing, inhaling my food instead of chewing it, trying to get to the next thing, right? But one thing is in order for us to have an attitude of gratitude, sometimes we need to say grace so we can say thank you. This might be the only time we say thank you in the day is when we're eating. So it's okay to get back to saying grace. Another thing that one of my friends, one of my husband's friends said is that she tries to start on 10 and end with 5. And what does that mean? That means start on 10. That means she does her very best to start her day at a 10. Whatever that means, if that means working out, if that means having coffee by the window, whatever that means for her and whatever that means for you, you start your day on 10. Why is that important? Because throughout the day, life will test you, and you could get to 1 really quickly, especially if you don't start on 10. So listen, I told you I had a 6-year-old who has been in virtual school all year. And I used to start my day on probably 5. By noontime, I was at a 0. I was checked out. I was so sick of school, right? But now I'm doing my best to start my day on 10. That means I have to get up a little bit earlier than the rest of the house. I get my coffee. I sit at the dining room table because it allows me to look out the front window. And I just sit there. It's only a few minutes, but it's my few minutes. It's all mine, right? And then the other thing she says is that she tries to end with 5. And that's 5 things she's thankful for. At the end of the day, she tries to end with 5. And so if we try to start on 10 and end with 5, I think that helps, especially those of us who it's hard to see the good that might have happened in the day. It's hard to see, we're so to-do list focused that it's very hard to see the good when we haven't checked off those things on our list that we want to check off. So just, this is just 2 things that we could do as we're thinking about contemplation, right? Because it slows us down to think about what are the 5 things I'm grateful for. And she tries not to repeat one throughout that week as best she can. The other thing, I have another friend who sets her alarm twice a day to her birthday to remind herself to take a moment to be thankful. So if your birthday is September 23rd, then you set it for 9:23 in the morning and 9:23 at night. And at those times, she stops whatever she's doing so that she can have a moment to be thankful. For you, that could be 1 thing that you're grateful for. For others, it could be 5 things, whatever you desire, right? And then I have another friend who at the end of the day, she reflects by journaling. Now, journaling is also a spiritual practice in and of itself, right? But again, contemplation, prayer, meditation, journaling, all of it works together. And just imagine if you were to write down the 3 things you're grateful for at the end of the day, and then at the end of the week, just look over everything that you've been grateful for within the week. And then possibly by the end of the month or end of the year, you're able to just have a notebook of gratitude, right? So these are just some things that some friends of mine are actually employing, which I think are really good tools, especially for those of us who, like we said, are active and yet we still want to contemplate. These are some things that you can do daily. You can do them weekly, but they don't require you to carve out hours of time. You can do it throughout your day and still be contemplative in your thinking. All right. I'm going to move on to the last one, and then I'm going to open it up for any other questions or comments as well. So this is one of my favorites, contemplation as forgetting. Oh my God, this is one of my favorites. So we think of fasting in terms of food, but I'm thinking of fasting in terms of forgetting, right? So when we think about contemplation as forgetting, there's a story in Parker Palmer's book, The Active Life, where it's a story about a wood carver. And the job of the wood carver was to carve some piece for the prince. And so before the wood carver would carve that piece, he contemplated. And in his contemplation, he forgot. He forgot the expectations of the prince. He forgot the criticism that people could have. He forgot any praise or success he could get from what he does. He forgot even how he might compare himself to others. He forgot everything, all the way to the point where he intentionally forgot how to carve the wood so that he could remember only the thing that was important, and that is carving the wood. And so when we're thinking about contemplation, what if your boss was asking you to complete a project, and the first thing you did to complete that project was to forget what your boss had expectations, to forget what your peers might say about you, to forget your performance review, forget all of these things, the criticism, forget the promotion that could come along the way. And when you had completed that work, your boss said to you, "This is an outstanding project. How did you do it so well?" And you say to your boss, "Oh, I forgot that you existed. That's how I did it." I forgot that you were even important. That's how I did it, right? Listen, there is something to forgetting all the things that drive us to behave in certain ways, and just getting down to our authentic self and doing the work that is in us. The wood carver knows how to carve wood. That's his or her job. It is in them. But what if we intentionally decided to forget all of the stuff that comes along with the thing that we're doing, so that we can just focus on the thing that God is calling us to do? And so there's this thing that I used to do when I would prepare to preach on Sunday. I used to stay up all night. I think I said this to you all last week. I used to stay up all night thinking that is the way. I used to think that was the way. That was what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to give up my entire night so that I might focus on writing this sermon, so that the people might hear and be, amazed by what I've said. But part of my staying up all night was also tied to my lack of trust. My lack of trust that I had everything I need in me already. The lack of trust that I had that God would bring back to my remembrance the things that need to come to my remembrance to write the sermon. And so I say to us, sometimes it is worth us stopping for a moment to forget all of the things that come along with our projects, our jobs, our parenting, our being in relationship, so that we could focus on the thing that's most important, right? And knowing that what we need will emerge when the time is right. So here's my question to you. What is God inviting you to forget, so that your work, your project, your book, your parenting, your whatever can flow freely? And I want to see your faces as we talk about this, because I think this is kind of deep, right? Because we don't want to forget. We want to remember everything. And sometimes God truly is calling us to forget. Anybody? No, it's fine. I know this could be a little heavy for us. Okay. I am going to go back to my screen So we talked about, let me go back here. All right, so we talked about contemplation as self-examination. We talked about contemplation and gratitude, and we talked about contemplation as a form of forgetting. And so we are really at the end. I want to share these resources with you because I think that they would be helpful if you are interested in kind of digging deeper. Joy Unspeakable, I spoke a little bit about that. Dr. Barbara Holmes, an awesome book about the contemplative practices in the Black church, particularly as it relates to African Americans, their experience through the Middle Passage and our experiences now here in the Americas. Soul Feast was an awesome book. It has much more in it than I can even cover, but it is very practical in that it gives you steps on how you can employ some of the practices. So you're not kind of left trying to figure it out, but it gives you some steps on how to do them. Soul Care is an awesome book as well. One of my favorites is The Active Life by Parker Palmer. It has been just profound in my ministry, and it has been very helpful. The examples that he gives are very profound and very helpful, and they just help to reveal to us the ways that we navigate this world without even knowing it. Like he does a very good job in kind of revealing truth, right? Helping us to take off the mask, take off the illusion, and helping us to see our authentic self. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality is also a great book, as well as Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, Practices That Transform Us. So all of these books I tapped into a few articles as well. But these books have been instrumental in helping me to kind of think through what we would talk about together and how we might be able to share and being able to give you practical examples. I do not like just lecturing and not giving you something that you can put into practice. And so hopefully what I have shared and what I've offered to you has been helpful and you can actually use it. Our time is really up. It's 9:47, but you are free to share. You are free to jump off the call. I won't take it as you being rude. I know that we all have services we have to get to. I just want to thank you for the time that you have carved out for me. I appreciate sharing with you. And I am always available if you want to kind of talk about any spiritual practices that you are thinking about employing, or if you say, hey, Dr. Moore, I got a new one. This is something new that I've been doing. I've combined 3 together or whatever. I'm always open to that. As the professor of spiritual formation, my students, I'm always interested in kind of helping them to be able to think beyond some of the classical forms of spiritual practices so that they can engage in a practice that really fits them. And so if you have something that you're doing or you're considering and you think it is something that they would be interested in, feel free to share it with me, and I'll certainly give you credit for it and probably ask you to maybe come in and even kind of talk about it to the students as well. And so I am open to all of that. So that's all I had on this lovely Sunday. Uh-oh, I'm looking at something in the chat. Let me see. Oh, thank you, Greg. I do appreciate it. Thank you. We got to do this again. And I like the Zoom format. I know you might like the webinar, but I like being able to see your face. I like being able to hear, even if it's only one person talking back. At some point, I'm going to get the rest of y'all to talk to me now. If we do this enough, you'll talk back to me, I'm sure. So, yeah. So, that's all I had. I'm gonna hang up. If there isn't anything else. Okay. All right, y'all be good. Have a great Sunday. Take care. Stay cool. It's hot outside.